So good afternoon. Welcome, 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 welcome. I'm so happy to have you here, especially the week before Thanksgiving. That's exciting. We are in our second to last session of the whole series, of the whole double feature. So we've gone through a lot. We're in week 10. Week 10, session 10 is reading and writing for a purpose. My name is Natalie Kleber, and I am the middle school and high school literacy PD specialist here at the Department of Education. Session 10 is one of my personal favorites. I feel that as a teacher and as a teacher coach for 5 years, I feel like the biggest progress we made was by doing this particular structure or strategy with our kids. And two people who really inspired me to do this were two amazing middle school ELA teachers. They constantly got kids in the 30s or the 40s AI assessment index for their class, and they would pump them out all day, every day, 90s to hundreds, grew the kids substantially. And I really attribute a lot of that to this particular strategy. So welcome to second to last session in our content literacy in action series. Our objective today is that you're going to be able to implement the reading and writing for a purpose support with your students while using high quality instructional materials. We're going to talk about the purpose of that. We're going to talk about see what it looks like in action, some next steps, and then a closure. So we have really been diving into Scarborough's reading rope, and we just been talking a lot, those first 4 sessions on the lift kit really focused on what to do if our kids in 3 through 12 are not reading still. And we said that lift kit focuses on this bottom part, that word recognition part, and helping students to get more automatic with it so that they become a skilled reader. And then we said our content literacy in action series really deals with this upper part of the rope, the language comprehension. And I've been talking about the fact that a lot of time teachers ask, what can we do to improve reading comprehension? And I tell them there's not any one thing that you can do to improve reading comprehension. There's some high leverage strategies that we've gone over in here, but comprehension is made up of all of these things. Sorry, guys. Sarah got kicked out, so I'm just making sure I'm looking to see if she's in the waiting room. So comprehension is made up of all of these things, background knowledge. And there's a lot in our curriculum around background knowledge now because we know that. Natalie Wexler's work does a lot of work. She does a lot of work around that. Vocabulary, we've done a support on that. Language structures and syntax, which is your grammar and your semantics. When somebody reads something, do they understand really what those words are saying and not just black and white on the page? Verbal reasoning. Do they know how to make an inference or a metaphor, what a metaphor means? And then literacy knowledge, print concepts and genres. Do they know how to extract meaning differently from an informational text than they do how to extract information from a literary text? And it's a very different hat. And there's different structures in those texts that can help us to understand if that's something we normally struggle with or need more time with. So just working towards that. So we've said that the content literacy series builds proficiency within the 4 areas of literacy, which are reading, writing, speaking, and listening, using those high quality instructional materials in a whole class setting. And so this particular structure today lives in both because we're reading and writing for a purpose. And so these are the other reading ones that we've covered so far. Whole class read aloud, partner reading, independent reading, annotating text, direct and explicit vocabulary. So if you missed any of those, make sure that you go back and watch them because I have the videos and the slide decks for this. And I just want to make sure y'all know where to find those. So let's see. When you go into our literacy library, okay, so if you go at Louisiana Believes, I'm going to put the link in the chat. But if you go to Louisiana Believes and type in literacy, you're going to get to our literacy landing page. It looks like this. And down at the bottom is our literacy library. These content literacy docs that we've been going over live in this second pillar in our instruction, intervention, and extensions pillar. So I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste that for the chat. But here they are down here. And each of the supports can be downloaded. And there's a webinar here where I just talk basically what content literacy is. Go ahead and pop that in the chat. And then if you're looking for previous recordings of the content literacy series, you want to go to this third pillar, professional growth. And you want to scroll all the way down to the bottom and you're going to see our grades 3 through 12 literacy support PD series. These are all the slide decks from that I speak from. And then these are all the recordings underneath. So you can see any of those weeks in case you missed any. Here is how to get to the actual recordings. And let's pop back into our session. So we also have writing. So we've done creating a claim, summer writing to develop comprehension using rubrics and using student exemplars. And next week, or not next week, next week's Thanksgiving, but that final week in November will be our last session together. I'll be going over writing frames in there. And then coming soon is our speaking and listening section, which is our discussion tracker, Socratic seminar, and fishbowl discussion. Okay, so the purpose of reading and writing for a purpose is to develop an understanding and application of the concepts of the content area text. It's also to develop reading comprehension and writing proficiency. So one thing that research says good comprehenders do is they monitor their own comprehension. As they're reading, they're monitoring to see, does that make sense? Does that connect to anything that I've already read about? Does it connect to something in my life? As we make connections to text, it anchors in our brains. It sticks there, okay? And we're able to retain that and make meaning of it. And so because of that, when kids don't normally do that, if they're not a good comprehender, that's one thing that they're lacking. This particular support, reading and writing for a purpose, helps them to maintain their comprehension as they read. It gives them a purpose. Now, we start off by giving them the purpose. And then as we continue doing this support or strategy throughout the year, we stop giving them the purpose and we start teaching them how to find the purpose. So we'll talk about that towards the end, but this is a level of scaffold supports to help them get there. All right, so there's some pre-work that has to be done before you can implement this particular support, or any of them really. You have to analyze the lesson materials to determine the objective for the lesson that day. So the objective could be to find the main idea of an informational text. It could be to determine the author's purpose of something. It could be to determine what was the biggest challenge in the Revolutionary War. There's all kinds of different objectives, but you're looking for that in your materials. Once you have determined the lesson objective, you're going to read and annotate your lesson materials. And the materials could be the actual lesson plan. It could be the text that come in it, but you're going to determine how students should arrive or could arrive at the outcome to determine what process you want them to go through. When I say that, for instance, if you're asking them what was the biggest challenge, let's say the rebels had during the Revolutionary War, you might be having them read some text and filling out a graphic organizer. You have to determine how they're going to get to that. It might be to conduct an experiment to determine what was the effect of the phenomenon, determine how they're going to arrive at that outcome, okay? After that, you want to select or create a question or writing prompt that aligns to the objective. So with guidebooks in particular, what I would have my teachers do, I would have them go to that end slide, that let's express our understanding slide. That's what they're going to have to do by the end of the lesson. You want to connect that to whatever standards you have in your lesson. That gives you your purpose. If they don't already have a question in the let's express our understanding slide, they usually do. You want to create one, or maybe you want to create a better one. And you can do that with any content area. That's just one example, okay? For social studies, I would have them tag the standard that they were teaching from that day, the materials, and then what maybe the graphic organizer was asking them to do, or what the writing prompt, if they have one, you use that one, okay? But that's your purpose. That is giving you your purpose for reading and your purpose for writing that particular day, okay? So it's going to be something they answer by the end of class to demonstrate mastery of that day's lesson. So step one, the first thing in all of these supports, the most important thing that you can do is you want to communicate the purpose to the students and the purpose of this support and the purpose of reading that day, okay? The objective and the purpose for reading that day should be visible to students. So either it's in a slide deck that you have prepared, or it's on a Promethean board, it's on a whiteboard, it's on a chalkboard, it's somewhere, but they know kind of, they can refer back, or maybe it's a handout, they can refer back to what is the purpose for today's lesson. That helps us guide our learning and stay on track. Step 3, you want to explain that there are always 2 purposes for reading, okay? The first one is you always need to understand and comprehend the text and what's happening, just generally what's happening in that text. but there's always a layered purpose too. Okay, so anytime we're reading and we're filling out a graphic organizer, or we're reading and we're writing, or reading and we're taking a LEAP test, there's always some extra added layer of purpose in there. So the second purpose for reading is to determine the purpose of that day's lesson. And the purpose is usually linked to a standard. I talked about that and what they could be. Step 4 is you want to model reading and annotating part of the materials so that students can determine what is essential to underline and to highlight and why. It's critical to walk through your thought process behind your annotations so that students can make some of those same connections on their own. A lot of students struggle, even my own kids. I have 2 kids that are high school age myself, and sometimes they'll struggle with, how do I know exactly what the right thing to annotate is? And there isn't necessarily a right thing to annotate, but the more that we talk through it, the more that I tell them, this is what I annotated and why, they start to adopt that as their thinking as well. So if you're going through your text with your students and you're just highlighting or just underlining and you're not saying anything about that, it's hard for those ones that are already needing more support to make connections and know what to highlight on their own. It's a big, big piece of this support. Okay, so let's say that we know that it's time for today's lesson. You're my students, I'm your teacher. Okay, good afternoon, class. Today we're going to create a purpose for reading our text today so that we're focused on extracting the essential information needed for today's lesson. But we also want to recognize that we always have the goal of reading to understand what the text is about overall. Picking a focus when we read, though, is going to help us understand the topic better and help us score better on our assessments as well. It's also going to help us develop our reading comprehension and writing skills, which is something we're always trying to work harder at getting better at. So people who are good at reading comprehension, they monitor their own understanding. They ask themselves, am I really understanding this or am I not? As they read. And this activity is going to help you do that. It's going to help you get better at comprehending text. So our purpose today is to determine the biggest advantage of using wind turbines. As we're reading, that's our purpose for today. So as we're reading, we're going to annotate, we're going to highlight, we're going to make annotations around the biggest advantage to using wind turbines. And to know the biggest advantage, I need to go ahead and make sure I know all the advantages. So as I'm annotating and reading in just a second, I'm looking for these advantages, and I might be annotating why that's an advantage. What impact would that have, or why is that so important? Okay. All right, so here's our text. Wind turbines could offer a double whammy in the fight against climate change. Besides harnessing wind to generate clean energy, so that's something I can definitely highlight. I'm going to highlight that now. I'm going to put an advantage to using wind turbines. That's just one advantage. It generates clean energy. Turbines may help to funnel carbon dioxide to systems that pull the greenhouse gas out of the air. Okay, so I've already found a second advantage to using wind turbines. So they generate clean energy, but they also help to funnel carbon dioxide to systems. And I'm going to annotate, if this was my class, I would have my little text up. And I'm literally, as I'm talking, I'm highlighting the text. I'm writing my little annotations on my Promethean board so they can see exactly what I'm thinking and why. And then I'm going to release them to continue doing that. Okay. Step 5, have students continue reading and annotating to determine the answer for the purpose of reading and learning that day. Make sure students are annotating general main ideas of the text as well as the purpose. So for instance, if we're studying a particular phenomenon in science right now, and it's not just wind turbines, like there's a big phenomenon and they see evidence of that, I might draw their attention to that or ask them to highlight or underline that as well. And then I just tag this in the slide deck, see annotating text guidance for further support. So if that's not something that you feel really comfortable with, or if it's not something that your class is really comfortable with yet, they really need that as a pre-learning skill before they launch into this support. Okay, so go ahead and check that out if you haven't. Step 6, once students have selected the correct answer in their annotations through reading to answer the prompt and have evidence to support it, it's time to start writing. Determine which format you would like students to use to answer the prompt or the question. So if this is a daily write, and I know my science and social studies teachers usually have, especially in middle school, sometimes in high schools, usually we have the same class periods, but in middle school, especially 3 through 5, sometimes ELA and math have double block, science and social studies have a half a block, so you have twice as many kids. We can't every day do claim, evidence, and reasoning. Or maybe you're an ELA teacher and you've assigned several writings, so you just want to claim. Okay. But even in the science curriculum and the social studies curriculum, they're asked to do CER paragraphs very frequently. So you want to maximize that. Determine like what is the big question in this unit that I would have them write the whole CER, but maybe right now I'm just having them write the claim. So be purposeful in what you're choosing for them to demonstrate mastery of that answer that day. Okay. So just like you explicitly modeled how to read for a purpose, you're going to explicitly model how to write for a purpose as well. And I go over this really well in the using student exemplars for further guidance. And I put a student exemplar up if you haven't done that yet, and it's a claim, and I'll say, this is a really good claim. And I have questions there for asking them, why do you think it's a good claim? What steps might this student have taken in writing this claim? How could you duplicate that claim? And I have those criteria up. I leave them up as students are writing so they know how to demonstrate mastery of that particular question. So after that, you want to provide time and questions for students to reflect on the quality of their responses. This is the biggest step that teachers a lot of times skip because of time. Like we got to go. We have to cover all this material, but it is definitely worth your time to cut something else a little bit shorter and to take time to do this occasionally. Because if they would just take the time to reread their answer and reflect, and if that becomes a practice of what they do, they're going to become so much more proficient in their writing if they take the time to do that. Consider using peer editing as well as written or verbal feedback from you, the teacher. So, both when they're independently reading and annotating and when they're independently writing, please take that time to circulate and just check the pulse to see, does anybody need me to pull that back in to give them another model, maybe either independently or in a small group. So you can kind of keep reinforcing what they need. And then lastly, you want to continue to remind students of the importance of always knowing their purpose for reading and writing so that they are set up for success from the beginning. If you take a whole test and you read the whole passage and then you get to that big essay question at the end, 9 times out of 10, you have to go back and reread everything you read because you missed the whole main idea of that question. That's what I'm saying. You're reading to understand what the thing is mainly about, but you're also reading for that purpose. And especially when students are taking an assessment, whether it's a summative assessment or an end of year assessment, like a LEAP kind of assessment, you don't have time to do that many reads of something. When you're in class, you have time to do multiple reads sometimes if it's a really important text or idea, but on the test, they don't. And so it's really important to show them how to find that purpose before they even start reading. Also model instances for how to find the purpose so students know how to do this independently. That's where you're getting to as the year progresses. Instruct students that when they are writing or taking an assessment, typically the prompt or questions being asked guide us in the purpose. So you can tell them this helps you find your purpose. And the prompt or question becomes the purpose in that instance. Look at upcoming lessons. These are some next steps. Look at upcoming lessons to decide which text would be best to model how to use the support. And then I want you to print or bookmark the support so that you can refer back to the explicit directions. One thing that kids need, and I'm not talking about people who are already proficient with this. I'm talking about students who need more support. And in any given class that I've taught, whether it's an honors class, an inclusion class, or just a regular class, you have about a third of the class who's automatically going to be proficient on their own most times. You're going to have 2/3 of the class are going to need at least a little bit more support. And then you might have a third or less who are going to need more support than that. So these explicit, that's what makes these supports so great. It has to be systematic and explicit instruction from you, the teacher, so that they can really understand how to do this on their own. So it becomes their thinking. It becomes their habit. As they continue their learning. Ask yourself after the lesson if you highlighted the intentionality required from this support. Are you noticing a difference as a result of implementation? So sometimes when I've taught teachers to do this, they've rolled it out. We definitely don't expect it to be perfect the first time we're doing something. I'm not perfect in the first time I do anything. But we put the purpose up on the board, okay? And we tell them to read and go answer. they really need that explicit model from you for the reading and the writing piece. And they might need some guided practice where you kind of let them go and bring them back, let them go and bring them back. The pulse of the class is going to tell you how to do that. All right, let's look at this particular support, and all of the supports look the exact same in that they're structured the same way. So at the top, it has when it would be applicable for the different content areas. And once again, if you didn't hear me say this, every content area at the State Department has given feedback on this. So ELA has read these and given feedback, math, science, social studies, all of his content areas have read these and given feedback. I love that because then everybody's on the same page. They all know what we're doing. I want you to imagine the impact if teachers at a school are doing this in ELA, in math, in social studies, in science, are all using the same common language, they're all using the same supports, and what that's going to mean for literacy skills across the campus for those students. They become very powerful. Okay, so this is when you would use it, who it could support, the purpose, and I always tell you why it's so important to communicate that purpose to your students. And then these are the explicit steps that I just went with you through with you on the slides. I know I'm successful when. You'll be successful when you see students are more comfortable at extracting the essential information from a text. They'll also be able to speak to and write about the essential information in that text. So at the beginning of the year, especially my English language learners and my students with disabilities would constantly rely on me to kind of hold their hand and walk them through. As we did supports like this, by middle of the year, they really weren't looking for me a whole lot because they knew I'm empowering them to do this on their own. They felt more comfortable, and they also knew my expectation was that you get it done. So there's a lot of times that I released you. Now I'm monitoring you. I'm looking to see, is it productive struggle or are you just struggling? Because then I need to pull you back and give you another model. But it really helped them to become so much more proficient because they knew my expectation was that they could do it based on all the support that I was giving them. This additional considerations piece is for students who just might have more needs than just using the regular support. So cooperative groupings are a great strategy for this one in particular, especially to assist students who need more support. You can add the grouping as an added layer of support after the direct and explicit teacher model and before you release them to have an additional opportunity to practice. And what I mean by cooperative groupings is that you have some kind of structures in those groups where they kind of have a role. They don't need to have a whole name tag and anything. You can, I had them, but you don't need that. I'm just meaning that students know how to manage the materials in that group. They know who's in charge of getting those people started. They know what's expected of them by the end. They might even have some conversation stems to keep the discussion going, to drive them so they don't just sit there. But this is a great added layer of support. Students in the initial stages of language development may require more practice in speaking and listening before progressing to the reading and writing components of literacy. Additional activities for these students could be a small group with the teachers where they have further practice highlighting and annotating important information before scaffolding to a full writing. And in the beginning, I would have students like maybe start their exit ticket in Portuguese. These students are not going to be able to write you a full claim response. But what we started out doing was, okay, I want you to start by highlighting the correct answer in the text. Then we would progress to that and maybe a few words in the margin that explaining it. Then we would go to a writing frame where I gave them a frame and they're just filling in the pieces of information they need. And we would progress all the way to them writing a claim statement. These students also may benefit from writing 1 or 2 bullet points with the most essential information before writing their full claim. So you can do that too. Just get them, I want you to write 2 pieces of important information from this text. Because they're wearing 2 hats. They're trying to learn the English language and they're also trying to learn whatever content is that you're teaching them. So those are just some things that can really help those students. Okay. So in closure, direct and explicit instruction is the best way to help support struggling readers. The modeling and think aloud piece of this support is providing the largest impact to students. It's going to make the biggest difference out of everything else in the support. Extracting the most important information in a text and synthesizing a claim is a very complex skill that bolsters reading comprehension. So if they can see you modeling this on a daily basis until they become proficient, if they can hear your thinking on a daily basis before they can become proficient, they're going to be so much better at reading and writing by the time they leave your class, for sure. Good comprehenders monitor their own comprehension as they read, and writing for a purpose is a great way to help facilitate that particular skill. They really go hand in hand. Sometimes we think you have to be a good comprehender of text before you can write about it, but a lot of times just having students go through the process of writing helps them to be more intentional when they're reading, and they kind of feed each other. So, practicing that writing also helps to enhance reading comprehension. So in closure, as always, if you have any questions or comments, I would love to hear from you. You can reach us at louisianaliteracy@la.gov. And I'm going to go ahead